In today's episode of Today in World War II, the British conduct a massive commando raid in Norway that gives them a very valuable prize. The British Navy sinks a German battleship off of Norway. The Third Army, Patton's army, relieves Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge. And then finally, a American first lieutenant shows amazing valor and wins the Congressional Medal of Honor. Let's get started. Okay, so if you know anything about history, you know that the British formed their commando units. They were absolutely the best uh, commando type special forces in the war. They did have a propensity to go after Norway. As you know, Norway was occupied by the Germans in 1940. Well, the 23 British commandos, and they also brought on 77 Norwegian army soldiers with them, and they made raids in two different parts of Norway. Now, I like a good special forces slash commando raid as much as the next guy, but I also like to pick things that have significance in the overall mosaic of the war. And this was an important raid because they just so happened to capture or excuse me, sink a German patrol boat. Well, you think, well, how, in this grand scheme of things, that's just a drop in the bucket. But this patrol boat had an Enigma code machine and code settings that were captured by the commandos. So that right there made it incredibly important raid. And no matter how many they lost, which there's no record of how many they lost in that raid, nevertheless, that alone made it worth the price of admission because that was a great step. Like I said, the British code breaking process throughout the war it consisted of little moments like this. Getting this code book here, this code book, these code settings. It all started with the Poles before the war, and it continued. And this was a major advance as well. So another major advance that's going to happen for my channel is if you subscribe to my channel and then click the bell that will get you notified whenever I drop a new video. It really helps with the algorithm. I appreciate it. So if you could do me a solid, I would be very, very grateful. On today, December 26, 1943, the British Navy, the Royal Navy, got a huge scalp when they were finally able to sink the British battle cruiser Scharnhorst. Now, this is in the same class as the Graf Spee. These were, warships that were built when the Germans still had limitations from the Treaty of Versailles. And so they were like cruiser hulls, but they had battleship type guns. Anyway, the Scharnhorst had been a very productive surface raider. It had been a thorn in the Royal Navy's side, especially in the North Atlantic. And when the convoy started to supply the Soviet Union, it was always a threat. They were always worried about it. They had made multiple attempts, as we've chronicled in previous videos in this project, to sink it or at least delay it and keep it in port. Well, in this case, the three British cruisers, including the HMS Belfast, attacked the Scharnhorst, and they were able to knock out the Scharnhorst fire control radar, which meant they were in less danger of the shells from the Scharnhorst. And I will say one thing about the German Navy. For all their faults, they could throw some heavy fire and accurate fire. Just wait till you see what happens with the Bismarck when it goes up against two British battleships. It wasn't pretty. So the Scharnhorst, tried to flee, but it was intercepted by a British battleship, the Duke of York, and some other uh, our Royal Navy ships, and it was just bombarded to death basically, and it sank. The crew, almost all of them were perished in the attack. About 1927, I believe, died. I think 36 survivors were the only ones that were able to make it out of that battle. But that was a hugely successful battle for the Royal Navy, so good on them. What's also good for you will be to make sure you like this video. Just very simple. Just go down below the screen. There's two symbols, thumbs up, thumbs down. Hit the thumbs up, and that will like it. And then also, as a bonus, just leave a quick comment. Just say "Death to the Scharnhorst" or something like that, and that helps the algorithm show my content to more people's feeds. So that would be good for you and good for me. Thanks. On December 26, 1944, the U.S. Third Army under General Patton, who had been making its way north as soon as the Battle of the Bulge started in the middle of the month, well, in 3 days, they were able to pivot from an existing ongoing offensive against the Germans down in the south. They were able to pivot and start moving forward. And today was the day that they were able to break through the city of Bastogne and relieve it from the siege that the Germans put around it. So that, Patton was an amazing general when it comes to that stuff. He was just, by far, he was a genius. Best German offensive general we had in the war, at least in Europe. I will say this: it's kind of funny, and if you've seen the battle, if you've seen the Band of Brothers on HBO, which I've seen ad nauseum, you know that the paratroopers, took offense at the characterization of Patton relieving them, as in Patton rescued them, and their attitude was we didn't need Patton to rescue us. We were doing just fine on our own. They have a point because paratroopers, they're taught to be surrounded. That's their job is to drop in behind enemy lines. Ipso facto, they are always surrounded. But it's inter-service rivalry is always fun as long as they're on the same side. And in this case, that helped to help them to stop the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge. Patton once again was shot down by Eisenhower, who I believe was not a brilliant tactical general. He was a great manager of people. They needed someone like him to keep the coalition together with all those egos underneath him, like Montgomery and Patton, in all fairness. But Patton begged Eisenhower to let him cut the Germans off, and cut them off behind the bulge to surround them and take them all. And Eisenhower overruled him again and told them we're going to push them on a wide front back and not cut off the head of the snake, which was unfortunate because that led to a lot more casualties and it was a longer process. But anyway, on this happy day, good for Patton to relieve the airborne in Bastogne. And then finally, on December 26, 1944, in Italy, on Samacalonia, up in Tuscany, Italy, the Germans were making a local counterattack, and it was not going the Americans' way. And there was a forward artillery observer, John Fox. He was a lieutenant. His job was to call in artillery, to coordinate them. So, he'd be on the radio with the artillery. He would say, okay, on these map coordinates, hit a salvo here or whatever. They were very, very important, against the Germans. I think that with all due respect to the Soviets, I think that the American artillery was by far the best in the war. In this particular case, he kept calling, as the Germans advanced, he called in closer and closer and closer artillery strikes until he finally called them down on him because that's how close the Germans were. He was killed by his own artillery, but in the final, when the battle was over and they came, the Americans came up and they counted over 100 soldiers, dead German soldiers around his position. So he sacrificed his life to save others, and for this he received the Medal of Honor, and rightly so. So I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to get you another video tomorrow.